All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, we're talking male-female dynamics, so I have to be a snatch specialist today. Uh, Specifically, you asked for this last week, way before any other things ever happened, for me to talk about an idea I have thrown in the ether before that you were like, huh? Where I made the comment that women are more authoritarian than men.
Hmm.
And we're going to break that down. This is officially, technically, a Wheel of Time episode. I think this one will be helpful to just start with the way things are in
Hmm.
real life and then show how it's illustrated in certain ways in the literature, the Wheel of Time literature.
Yeah, um I have some an interesting passage that wasn't exactly what I was going for when I was looking for it from the Path of Daggers, because it's an interesting illustration. See, I was going for Rand, but then I found a Min point of view that made me go, that's interesting. Um, Especially since kind of what sparked this is one of the kind of revelations I've had, and I've used a lot since you talked about this originally, is that women are more coalitional, men are more hierarchical. And it just, when you think about that in its most basic terms, that makes a whole lot of sense and explains a lot of the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus phenomenon of why we are the way we are, why we are different, and why that difference sometimes creates clashes. And
Yeah,
and so when you said that women were more authoritarian, it sounds contradictory.
because what we think of in history when we think of authoritarian is we think of dictators of
Hmm.
yesteryear, right?
Hmm.
We don't think of the actual process that goes behind it and what ends up in that situation and just what we do on day-to-day basis as far as
Yes.
what is considered kind of more of a free flow type situation versus what is executive top down control of a situation. But yeah, so we think of dictators of the past when we think authoritarian. Those are just the extreme examples.
Hmm.
And they're actually fantastic examples of how it goes wrong, right? And actually, I do have some literature on the difference between male leadership styles and people more likely to follow them and female leadership styles and what makes people more likely to follow them. So, but I want kind of open this up with an example I gave you before, but it was off air. When we think of family dynamics, most everybody can think of a family because most of us unless you're Gen Z and 35 or under, have had kids or have been in a family or been part of a family, right? And we're going to go to the trope of mom's at home with the kid, taking care of the child, and the child is acting up. And mom says, just wait till your father gets home and hears about this. Father comes home, hears about it, punishes the child. And we always revert to the patriarch. He's the head of the household and he's the one laying down the law. But in that situation, is he?
Hmm.
Or is he just doing what his wife wanted and raising his child to be respectful to mom? Who was the one that set the rule? Who was the one that asked for the punishment? He was the arm of authority. She was the authority in that situation, if you really break it down, because she's the one that
Hmm.
set the law that created the punishment that was executed at her command. So, so yeah, this is an example we can most of us because we've if you exist on this earth, you have a mother and father. I'm sorry. One of them was male and one of them was female. One created sperm, one created egg. Otherwise, you wouldn't exist. And so and you can see the effects of the other part of it is when there isn't father to be the enforcer of the law, you typically have more masculine behavior from the single mother, right? We do see masculine behavior in single mothers uh, as time goes on because it's necessary, because there has to be enforcement of the law or there is no law, right?
Hmm.
The kid's just going to realize I can do that and get away with it and just keep doing it because that's what children do. Uh, but yeah, so that's kind of how I wanted to start with it. But I do believe that's the basis of where a lot of this comes from because it is a useful skill when it comes to raising a child who is a basically for the first 2 years of their life just a complete moron when it comes to the world. and you actually do need executive function from a parent to keep this damn thing alive. But yeah, so yeah, that's where I kind of wanted to start, and you can fill in any blanks before I get on to the literature.
I'm trying to remember um who it was. Hannah Arendt. That's who it was. Uh every generation's civilization is invaded by barbarians. We call them children. Um to your point of the necessity of that that discipline. Um and he's one of the things that popped into my head when you were talking about the who's actually the authoritarian in that is that I don't know if you've ever been in this situation, but I have, and I learned, when I was older and was talking to my dad about being a dad, and it was, yeah, that happens sometimes, of the necessity of mother and father being on the same page. Because if mom gets too authoritarian in laying down the law, then she puts dad in a real pickle because I have to support mom here, but I don't think this is that severe.
Hmm.
But you put me in this situation of either I undermine you, which is bad for, the little barbarians, or I have to enforce a punishment that I don't think is warranted.
Hmm.
And that happens sometimes, and that is, I think, a good example of what you're talking about with the authoritarianism, and where that line gets crossed of disciplinarian versus authoritarian.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is where I wanted to start. So I was hope, yeah, you kind of gave me my direction there, which is why I wanted you to talk. Let's talk to the root of it, because you call them the little barbarians. They're the little helpless things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the data is pretty dang clear that women tend to score higher in trait neuroticism. And that's a good thing, because neuroticism, we use that word and you think neurotic, uh, and it's got a bad rap, but it is one of the big five personality traits. And what
Mm-hmm.
we know about the big five personality traits is they are all useful and they are all bad if you go to one extreme or the other. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
so neurotic that you can't function, that's your super high anxiety, right?
So
You know.
pause a second there, because to that point, I think you should define neurotic, technically speaking, because I think you're right that whenever we use the term colloquially, it's always negative. I'm trying to think of a time where I have used that term or heard it used where it was even neutral, let alone positive, but even neutral. It's always negative.
Well, let me give you an official definition: a personality trait that describes a tendency to experience negative emotions such as anxiety, depression, and anger. Negative emotion, but this is important because you made a huge important point that I'm always trying to make is even the word negative here isn't a negative thing, because negative emotion can save your life, right? Squiggly thing in front of me, snake. Might not be a snake, might be a stick, might be a piece of string, but if it's snake, you're dead. And
Mm-hmm.
so this propensity to have this feeling is adaptive. And we have a negativity bias because you can live every day of your life, you can only die once. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the importance of negative emotion. We all should have a healthy degree of neuroticism because it's a survival tool. It's what keeps us from, running across the steel beam 50 stories in the air. Those people lack a healthy bit of neuroticism in their life, or else they would be worried they would fall. But they're so low on the neuroticism scale that they can't even have fun unless they're about to die, right? So this is something that can be positive, and it's very useful when you're dealing with those little barbarians because, and now we talk about authoritarian rules. Stop fighting, put that thing down, don't put that in your mouth. All of these things, don't
Mm-hmm.
don't go over there, don't get out of my sight. All of these things are useful for a portion of this child's life. The problem is this same personality trait that's useful for very small children bleeds into everything you do. So when you get to an authoritative position, you have that same high personality trait, which is deep down inside, I can keep everybody from making the mistake if I set down these rules, right? If they would just listen to me, they wouldn't make the mistake, or they wouldn't do the wrong thing, or nobody would get hurt. What we have from the fire did a good analysis of females versus males on campus when it comes to free speech. And we see that pretty much across the board, no matter what the topic, whoops, let me just get the females on the left, males on the right, females uh, opposed allowing speakers who were problematic more than males, right?
Mhm.
Because someone could be harmed.
A
So
lot more.
yeah, a
That
lot more. The
that is what we
protective.
call statistically significant.
So what we see across the board from the work of organizations like FIRE is women are females are more apt to set rules in a way that they think is protective than males are.
Hmm.
And so when we look at childhood behavior, say the kid gets a little older, what do you see from mom? You still see quit that. Don't do that. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't get on,
Hmm.
don't climb that tree. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't high wire the back of the couch. Where dad is like, whoa, hold on. Don't do it till I have a beer. Right?
Wait, let me get my camera out.
Yeah. Rub a little dirt on it, kid. Where mom is, here's a band-aid. Now, this is speaking in generalities. I know there are a bunch of good moms out there that let their kids get bumps and bruises, but
Hmm.
in general, the mother is more likely to be protective, where the father is more likely to just be like, don't be too dumb, I guess. So you have that from a young age, and it's adaptive at a certain point. But everything that's adaptive ends up bleeding over into other things. Male aggression is adaptive
Mm.
for survival. But when you get into, like I say, a police situation where you are a very high testosterone male, you're more likely to be overly aggressive with the people you're handling in a traffic stop or a domestic violence situation or something. So something that is very aggressive can end up bleeding over into other things in real life in a negative way. And this neuroticism is kind of the basis for all of it. And yeah, so that's kind of the root of it.
I was trying to decide which direction I wanted to go here. Um,
Well, I can continue to go to a societal level with that because the root of that neuroticism is what? Threats, right? Threats in
let's
the world.
let me bring in the Wheel of Time example here, and let's stick with the neuroticism and when it's good and when it's bad, because um I think Egwene's storyline is very good, very compelling, and she becomes very heroic at the beginning of her rise to power. And you've talked about she becomes an authoritarian, and that's when she becomes very unlikable, and you and Scott like to beat on her. Um, but
Well,
that
yeah,
beginning
be
part,
be a little
she's
vague on Egwene because I wanted to compare just the White Tower versus the Black Tower
mm,
in leading up to Egwene specifically. But yeah.
but when I was thinking about this topic, it occurred to me that it's the exact same problem with Elaine, is that when Elaine is in that position of weakness, when she's adventuring with Nynaeve, and it
Mhm.
is a position of a weakness. She doesn't have, you know, the resources of that she grew up with, the resources of Andor and Caemlyn. She barely has the resources of the Aes Sedai, and she's surrounded by threats. And she has to be very subtle and very clever. And she's not wrong in what she's doing. She is trying to accomplish something good and noble, right? Same thing with Egwene of
This is something I'm just
where are
putting
we
in the
at here?
background. Yeah, this is something I'm putting in the background because it goes right hand in hand with what you're saying.
Um, yeah, so let's get to this. The Egwene part is, I think, because when I was flipping through looking for the passage I wanted, I flip past the out on the ice, which I think is one of Egwene's two greatest moments in the whole series. Is that sequence where she takes greater authority
Mm-hmm.
and becomes, openly becomes no longer just a figurehead. She is very subtle, she is very savvy, she is very clever. That is the coalitional part of the female mind.
Well,
And
except I
she's
took
not
that
wrong.
moment to be the less coalitional part with her stuff. I think when she was developing relationships,
Mm-hmm.
especially when she was a prisoner in the tower, she, oh, spoiler alert for people who haven't finished it. But when she's a prisoner in the tower, she does work the relationship angle a lot more. But on the
Yeah.
ice, how did she gain power? She gained power by outlawing, out legalizing everybody on the field.
What the climax giggity is what you're talking about. I'm talking about how she got to that point, because that's to me why these two moments are her two greatest moments. The When she's a prisoner and when she solidifies her position as Amarillion rather than just a puppet for the sitters, is that she had to get there. So the climax is more, probably more satisfying when she's a prisoner, because what's that climax? It's when she says, "We're under attack. We need a general, and that's me." You know, lead, follower, get out of the way, as Patton said.
Mm-hmm.
How she got to that point on the ice was she had to be very clever. She had to build relationships. Sometimes those relationships were more even, sometimes they were more hierarchical, depending on the situation, depending on what she had to do with that particular individual. Um, and that led to that moment where she was able to take control. Now, then what she does after that is, really where you and I, it's hard to argue against you and Scott bashing her, because she does become very quickly very authoritarian, and that's what
I would even use the
this point
word
is.
tyrannical, because she does browbeat the people she used that authority to get over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the way there, she was a lot of milk and honey,
Mm-hmm.
but as soon as she got that power, it was, oh, no, no, you signed this deal, you must stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even look at the dynamics. How many people in her coalition within that camp were part of it because she got a gotcha on them?
Mm-hmm.
What was the Myril? Myril's one of them because she found out about Lan.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all the people that were involved with that, Nassau, and she was the yellow, right? And
Mm-hmm.
all of those that were part of that little under the table scheme that she found out about, that was her power over them. And once she had a thumb on the scale, she was able to use that and utilize it to her advantage. Now they ended up following her on their own accord in the long run, but that's how books work, you know. She did use that authority to gain that power. Uh, Now it's not just the neuroticism, it's the empathy too. It's
Mm-hmm.
the nurturing part, because these are two very feminine traits that when they bleed over into other things, they can cause problems. So we'll
Which is
kind
what
of
you've got
put a
highlighted
pin in
here,
that
which,
with,
yeah.
yeah, put a pin
Yeah.
in that with Elaine when we go to talk about
Mm-hmm.
her later. But yeah, so what I have here is a journal article, and this they actually studied the difference between men and women in authoritarian things, and this is where the neuroticism comes in, and this is where Egwene, your example with Egwene comes in, because when we have situations of higher inequality, females do tend to endorse authoritarian values more than men, because that's the track to having more equality, right? But what we also see, hopefully I have these in the right order, is when we get to more egalitarian societies, oh, I have it in the wrong order. But when we get to more egalitarian societies, people tend to drift back into their standard gender roles, which is what Peterson talks about with Scandinavian societies.
Yep.
And there is actually a term for this, which I found out in this research, because now we have to look at the direction of these movements. Because if we look at a less authoritarian type situation, which is what originally happened back in the women's suffrage movements, the feminism 1.0, in the Scandinavian countries, the movements that went on there to create more egalitarian societies, you did have to kind of step in, but it really was just a situation of we should have these rights because we're humans. And then the people that were in power, they're saying, yeah, that makes sense. Whatever, 14th Amendment, here you go. Boop, 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 boop. So, no, 19th, excuse me, 19th Amendment.
19th, yeah.
Yeah, 19th Amendment, here you go. And then it became then what we saw was the gender equality paradox, which is when things got more equal, people separated more into their gender roles than they were before everything was equal. And that would be great because that's the freedom approach.
Hmm.
When you have more freedom and you have more equality and people drift to these different roles, let them. That would be the freedom approach. But no, we had to get to feminism 3.0 and 4.0 that said, we can't stand that. So we're going to force roles to be equal, equitable across the board. Then we go back into the authoritarian kind of regime to make things happen. So when you're looking at something from an egalitarian or an equal outcomes perspective, by nature, it takes authority. So if you want equity, if you want socialism, if you want any distribution of resource, we'll just say resource, that could be money, that could be access to power, that could be anything, that could be access to mates, that could be anything. If you want equity in any kind of resource, you have to force it, which means executive control, executive power to force the outcome. We see this in HR departments all the time, forcing outcomes through bureaucracy, right? Thomas Sowell once said, the purpose of bureaucracy is to do the bureaucratic thing, not to have a good outcome, right?
Hmm.
So that it becomes a state of the state, right? And that is pure authoritarianism. And that is actually a very risk averse, neurotic type personality trait that takes that to happen. Whereas we look at hierarchies, they form and then they exist. Look at a male sports team versus a female sports team.
Hmm.
Did everybody get their turn in the female side, or who's the team captain on the male side? It's merit based. Okay, so we can go to Wheel of Time then, White Tower versus Black Tower, right? How do you gain status in the White Tower? What determines your status in the White Tower?
Hilariously, almost contradictory. And again, this is back to, did
Surface level, it
RJ,
sounds contradictory.
yeah,
Surface level.
did RJ know this or did he intuit this? Wait a minute, it's dudes flexing, right? What
It's
what
not
is your
even that. It's not even
it,
that. It again, surface level, it looks like that.
but surface level, it looks like dudes flexing in the gym, in the locker room, saying, puffing up the chest and saying who's bigger because it's straight up power.
Strengthen the power. Strengthen the power determines the hierarchy. It is completely an arbitrary measure on leadership ability or anything that matters in what they're trying to do. But it is a set rule. It
Hmm.
is a set rule and it is the law of the land. So even when the person who didn't go through the proper training, naive, didn't go through the noviceship, didn't go through the apprenticeship, didn't go through the testing properly, is officially the thing. She is officially the top dog thing because of this one arbitrary rule that they all follow, and it is the rule of the land, and you must follow it. Now, where that is surface level is different is when we talk hierarchies and merit. Let's take primates, for example. The alpha male beats his way to the top to be the alpha male, and he does it not only with his own physical prowess, but also with coalitions with other males to make sure that two don't gang up on him at any given time. But even still, typically the stronger male wins, but that's not guaranteed. The male who wins the fight wins. It could be a weaker male that wins because he's a better fighter. It could be I don't know how long apes live, what, 40 years, 30, 40 years?
I think so.
It could be the 30-year-old male that's just been in more fights than the younger, stronger
Hmm.
male because he knows how to fight. We see it in MMA all the time. The strongest guy doesn't always win. Anderson Silva
Yeah.
wasn't typically the stronger guy in the ring when he was in his heyday, but he won a shit ton of fights, right? So the alpha male was the more capable male, not just the strongest. Typically, they went hand in hand, as we see with Katswin, right? She's
Hmm.
super strong, but she's also super capable, right? But it's not this arbitrary rule that people follow because it is the rule. And we see that all across the White Tower. You do this because X rule. You do this because this is the courtesy. This is the tradition. This is this. What did we see in the Black Tower? Now throw Taim's little circle aside because loyalty was the major contributor there.
Yeah.
But they were merit based. How did you get the dragon? You saw battle and you participated in that battle and came out the victor, right? That was how you got the dragon in the early days of the Black Tower. You got the silver sword because you passed the tests. You got the silver sword because you were useful around the Black Tower. It
Hmm.
was completely merit-based system. Even loyalty is a merit-based system.
And you see this, most starkly, I think, with Androl of
Mhm.
who berates him and belittles him. It's the Time faction of, oh, Page Boy. Why is he important? Because he's one of Logain's right hand mans, because Logain recognizes, no, this guy's good. This guy's
Mhm.
useful. This guy's competent and also has a lot of wisdom because he's been around the block.
And even still, the things that strength was a barrier in his climb, but it was a barrier. It wasn't a an end all be
Mm-hmm.
all. You don't get to be this because you are weak.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was just something that it and actually in the literature it was so extreme he was so extremely weak in every way that it became a barrier. If
Mm-hmm.
he was mediocre, but he had this talent and he had all his mental capacities, he would have been just fine, right? So
It,
he
you know, uh, uh, Tom Brady, he was physically very mediocre, but he had this talent for playing the position of quarterback,
Mhm.
and he is now considered the if one of if not the greatest ever. Same thing with um, Larry Bird is another example I love because it's so hilarious listening to guys who played against him talk about how mediocre, quote unquote, Bird was physically, but he looked fast because he was so smart in the game. As a number of people have said, he knew what you were going to do before you knew it.
Mhm. Well, and I'll and the to not get us canceled, I'll give you a great example of where I think female professionals are better than males. Trial law.
Mm,
Females make excellent prosecutors and defense litigators because for the exact same reason. The point of your job is to use the law to your advantage and your client's advantage, right? Or you should be your other way around. Your client's advantage, which is to your advantage, right? So
mhm.
that is the purpose, and they're fantastic at it.
They're
You're
they're also very good at connecting with the jury
Mhm.
because they're connecting with a group of people. Um, rather than lecturing to that group, which is something men have a tendency to do. Uh, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this?
I don't know
Um,
where you were going with that. Huh.
uh, Speaking of lecturing, let me bring in some of my examples here, or my primary example, and get your take on this is
Oh, okay.
when
I remember
speaking
what
of
this page I brought up, but it wasn't what I wanted. Okay, yeah, this is important.
speaking of cancellation, when we talked about this off air and I went, huh, about the idea of women being more authoritarian. And what immediately jumped to mind is how Rand acts in the later books leading up to um, A Memory of Light and his epiphany at the end there is he's getting more and more authoritarian. He's also getting more and more emotional. That authoritarianism uh, exhibits itself as emotional outbursts. And the couple of scenes that immediately pop to mind are one of in at Knife of Dreams here, because I was going to go to speaking of Logain, his outburst against Logain when Logain tracks him down and tells him what's going on. And Cadswin is, hey, maybe you shouldn't treat, your underlings like this
Mhm.
when they're trying to help you. And that is, I think, one of the more egregious ones, because if not for Logain, you know, the light would have lost the last battle, because the only reason the Black Tower was there to help at all and wasn't just completely either subverted or destroyed was because Logain was there to oppose Taim. And he he throws a tantrum is the only way is the best way to describe it. Um and I didn't actually pull that passage up, because the other one I thought of was when he does it after he finds out about the bargain that his Aes Sedai made with the Sea Folk, and he has an outburst there. And you can understand that one a little bit more, because he's already very distrustful of the Aes Sedai and has good reason too.
Mhm.
But that outburst is very emotional. It isn't, it is a very, get us canceled, feminine,
Mhm.
neurotic outburst.
Yeah, which brings in this one here, which was kind of funny. Oh, my highlight went away. Okay, but near the bottom of that. So what we end up having is negative relationships between authoritarian leadership and the people under them, with when females take on that hardcore authoritarian type
Mm-hmm.
stance, but we get a positive relationship when males take on a more nurturing and benevolent stance. And so what these researchers found was that taking on the positive aspects of the opposite gender role actually increased your ability to have people follow you for the right reasons, for not because they have to, because they'll go to jail, but because they want to. And what we see a lot in kind of that authoritarian, and we see it with Elaine a little bit in her nurturing going overboard when she becomes princess and queen, right? Uh, and we see that in kind of like a socialist mindset, because take care of everybody mindset is is feminine traits going too far. Whereas if on the masculine, being benevolent and nurturing is taking care of people, but if you do it in a positive way that doesn't take away from others, you actually end up being like the benevolent dictator, kind of, to use that trope, right? The leader everybody wants to follow. But if you overdo your own gender role, which is what we see in the dictators of past, where you're the tyrant, then you end up in that situation where people only follow you because they have to, and you're going down as soon as someone can, right? Uh, and so, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And Taim's a great example because he was a tyrant, right? He led through force. Logain led through people wanting to follow him, but he was also more uh, empathetic to his own people and their plight than Taim was. Taim had zero empathy, right? And what we see with uh, Egwene is she actually loses empathy as she gets towards the top dog position. She becomes tower over all, which is, I think Scott would agree with me on that, which is the theme of the we started to not like her. She becomes tower over all. And where Naine's uh, arc went was she was very, language police, tradition police. Everything has to be, she was the ought over the is, right? And as she progressed in her storyline, she started to actually become, oh, this is the real world, and I need to actually be a little bit more malleable to the ways of the real world and get out of that heuristic. And I actually this might be why it does tend to be a feminine trait, because what we do know about females is they are more proficient in language than males, which actually is the language in and of itself is a control over inputs to create a system that that propagates realistically. So language is left hemisphere dominant. If someone has a stroke in the left hemisphere, they can't form words and all of this stuff, though they may be perfectly sound mind and body of the inputs they're getting in and what they want to say. But it is something that is limited by its very nature, because you can't describe everything with language. I'm having trouble doing it right now, right?
Mm,
Language is a system that has limits and bounds. And if you try to put everything in those boxes, then you have to create you have to control the world around you to fit in that box. And when you talk about the is versus the ought, well, it ought to be this way. The tower has these rules because the tower ought to be the beacon of hope for everybody, right?
mhm.
This is the difference. It's heuristic thinking versus being being part of the world around you. And women tend to shift more to left brain thinking than men. So I think all of these natural things play to that, and sometimes it's an advantage, and sometimes it's not. When you have a 2-year-old running around that could swallow a rock and die, you you need you need to have an authoritarian mindset to keep that baby alive till it's old enough to make decisions on its own. If you're trying to have a functioning business, you need to be able to, yes, have enough authority that you can set the direction of the business, but be able to delegate and let people do their damn job, or else it's going to fail because you can't do everything.
Exactly. And that is that delegation that you talked about, off air when we were exploring this topic is again immediately popped into my head. How is Rand acting after his epiphany versus before? He is being an authoritarian micromanager. That's
Mhm.
one of the things that makes him
Well,
explode
he
at
gets
people.
he gets in the yacht because why does he explode? He says, because you should be listening to me. You should
Mhm.
be doing what I say. I am the dragon reborn. I am the one saving the world, so you should be listening to me. When that's not
And,
how people work.
and in the lead up to the last battle, in the lead up to specifically in the lead up to going to the boar, he's bouncing around these different battlefields. Why? Not to micromanage, but simply to uh help and to boost morale. He's not there to take over. In fact, there are a couple of times where it's no, you're in charge. He says to Elaine, you're in charge for a reason. You make these decisions. You know, I'm just here to let the troops know. I mean, one, there is the grand strategy of he's trying to misdirect the shadow, but then also he is there to be a positive influence for both the leaders and the common soldiers. He's not there to micromanage. He's not saying you should have done it this way, which is exactly what he's doing with the micromanaging outbursts
Mhm.
as he gets worse and worse, really um you start to see elements of it in Fires of Heaven, but you really start to see the authoritarianism come out in Lord of Chaos. And then after what happens to him in Lord of Chaos, it really starts to ramp up in A Crown of Swords.
Mhm.
Um, and then I've got A Path of Daggers here because as I was flipping through to find the scene I wanted, and I was trying to remember exactly where it was, and so I ended up finding something a little different, which is I think the setup or a setup to what's going to happen here later in the book, which is about halfway through when he is um when he's with the armies down in Ilion, um cleaning up that mess. And So remember to set the scene. Torval, one of Taim's lackeys, shows up with a message from Taim, and they have this back and forth. And uh, Torval is giving a report on what's going on. And one of the things Rand does here is, and it seems logical, but to your point, he's overstepping and he's causing problems by micromanaging, which is uh he says the desert Torval mentions the deserters and how many there are, and Rand says the next time I visit the Black Tower, I want to see every deserter's head. A second piece of candied pear halfway to Torval's mouth dropped from his fingers and streaked the front of his fine coat. It might interfere with recruiting, making that sort of effort, he said slowly. The deserters, they do not announce themselves. Rand held the other man's gaze until it fell. And then he goes on to something else, but he bullies Torval here, and Torval's not wrong. The point of the tower is to recruit and train and get ready for the last battle.
Mm-hmm.
But Rand has decided, no, I want it done this way, not, increase the efforts to do this. It's do it now, do it my way.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, a little farther on, you get some of the why that is. And this is where a little something in the tea is brought up. Torval mentions that that's how Taim deals with the people who start to go mad. Kinder than gentling, even if we knew how. Kinder than leaving you insane and cut off, yes. Um, Kinder, Rand said in a flat voice, setting the mug back beside him on the table. Something in the wine. And he thinks to himself, my soul is black with blood and damned. Um, it was not a hard thought, not biting or edge, a simple statement of fact. A mercy any man might wish for, Torval. So he's blending yeah, he's not wrong that, especially from the man's point of view, the women think they're being compassionate, and for the men, it's no, I'd rather just you slip something in my wine and let me go to sleep and never wake up.
Mm-hmm.
But he's undercutting that with this deep self-flagellating neurosis that he has been building and building and building with this list of names and how terrible he is. And then a couple of paragraphs later, abruptly Rand became aware of Boreen, who's one of the servants there. It took a moment before he recognized the expression on her face. And when he did, he bit back cold words. How dare she feel pity? Did she think Tarmangaiden could be won without blood? The prophecies of the dragon demanded blood like rain. Leave us, he told her quietly. So he gets annoyed that someone is showing him compassion, that someone is showing him sympathy. Contrast that later, where he's showing sympathy and compassion. He's not any weaker. In fact, it makes him stronger in the last couple of books that he has found this balance of strength without hardness.
Well, but I think the ultimate message at the end was what was the thing that finally allowed him to win? What was the concept that Tam taught him to let go?
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about authoritarianism, it's actually when the toxic compassion we talked about before, the
Mm-hmm.
inability to let go. When you're in a power position creating policy based on your empathy and your nurturing and your risk aversion and your neuroticism, you who are you to have the authority to know what's best for the individual? Now, there are some blanket things that are good for most people, like, don't commit murder and don't steal and all of those things. But when down to the end of the day, your compassionate authority, it would require you to know what's best for everyone if you are in a power position. And people who have those tendencies have trouble releasing that personality trait that causes them to want to control everybody and do best for them. But you can't, because you have to winnow down to the individual level, and you have to have people empowered to do what's best for themselves. And it,
There's another great example here before we get to the um the actual scene with his outburst over the bargain. And as I was leading up to it, I was like, ha, well, this is fortuitous because um the scene is from Min's point of view. And as I'm skimming through here, it hits me of, oh, of course, this is why Min is such a fan favorite, but also why she is so good and important as a character, especially for Rand, is she is very good at balancing the masculine and the feminine.
mhm.
And you first see that superficially. How does she dress? Well, she's a tomboy. She's got her hair cut short and she wears pants, which is just unheard of. I mean, in a society like this, a woman wearing trousers, my gosh, how scandalous, right? But she also wears them in a way that shows off that she's definitely a woman, right? So you first see that superficially, but then as you get to know her and as we
She
get points
invented
of
yoga
view,
pants.
exactly, as as we get to know her, you see. So how does this is chapter 27 uh in A Path of Daggers, and it opens with her sitting there reading one of Harrod Fell's books and being annoyed because Rand has run off. He's not keeping in touch, and she's both annoyed but also worried, neurotic. But she recognizes it, and she's kind of, to your point, trying to let it go of, no, there's nothing I can do about this. There's no reason to get myself in a tizzy. Focus on the book. I'm trying to study here. I'm trying to do something important here. Stop letting this thing that you can't control overwhelm you. So, I mean, it starts off that way. But then when Rand actually gets there and they start arguing because Rand is, well, I'm I am the man, I am the doing of the things. And Min is, no, 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 no. Yeah, you're doing things, but we're supposed to be a thing here. You wrote me twice, and they weren't real letters. You know, it was just a sentence or two delivered by weirdos. Um, but what's interesting is her thought process during all of this. Um, because to our back to our negative examples of Egwene and Elaine, they would have very similar thought processes, but they would be different because they would be trying to manipulate someone. This isn't manipulation. This is Min trying to help Rand in the way that she wants to because she loves them, but also knows that she needs to because she recognizes the stresses and the negative emotions that she's under. I wrote to you, he said slowly, and she sniffed. Twice, with Ashaman to deliver your letters. You wrote twice, Rand al'Thor, if you call it writing. He staggered as if she had slapped him. No, as if she had kicked him in the belly, and blinked. She took a firm hold on herself and settled against the chair back. Give a man sympathy at the wrong moment, and you never regained the ground lost. Now, pause right there for a second. That is very Egwene and Elaine on the surface of, I need to be the boss. I'm trying to be the queen bee, but that's not who Min is, and that's not what she's doing. So continuing on, a part of her wanted to throw her arms around him, comfort him, draw out all his pains, soothe all his hurts.
So
He
part of her
had
wanted to
so
be the overbearing mother.
because he does need that. That is a thing that he needs, but not in this moment, right? He had so many and refused to admit a one. She was not going to spring up and rush to him, gushing to know what was wrong, or light, he had to be all right. Blah 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 blah. And then they get smoochy woochy. But she blends the moment of intimacy with a bit of the disciplinarian. It's go back and reread the chapter, and it is a great example of balancing that masculine and feminine. It's what you brought up in the literature of bringing on that positive male trait, but doing it as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very effective. It is, she is the reason Rand doesn't just completely go off the deep end books earlier than he does. And when he does go off the deep end, she is a major reason he comes back. Now, this is all building up to the Aes Sedai coming in and talking about the bargain. And something that struck me as I was getting to this point, that's really interesting is uh, Dobrain comes in and is giving his report, and then the Aes Sedai come in and talk about the bargain. And the first couple of um, points, uh, he doesn't lash out, even though he doesn't like them. Like the first one, um, Rand's response is, "I suppose I can live with that." The second one, uh, is, "So the agreement will survive me." Rand said dryly. He barked a laugh. "I can live with that too." But Dobrain, because the second one is about giving them land, basically giving them their own little trade enclave, very similar to what the Westerners did in the unequal treaties with China and Japan. Um, Dobrain, though, is annoyed at this. Why? Because Dobrain cares about the people he's in charge of. He cares about his country, Karheen. He's every city on water. Do they mean here too? A mile square under the light alone knows what peculiar laws? Blah 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 blah. They will ruin Karheen in a year, my Lord Dragon. They will ruin any port where you allow them to do this. And Rand just waves it away and says, we can work around it so that they don't have the total upper hand. Yes, it will be a benefit to them, but we can work around it. When does he lose his temper? Well, thirdly, the Dragon Reborn agrees to keep an ambassador chosen by the Othonmaer with him at all times. Now it's become personal and it's become an annoyance to Rand. So he has an outburst. What would you call that but a childlike, dare I say, toxically feminine reaction? He didn't care about the other ones because it didn't affect him personally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this inconveniences him and annoys him personally. What Rand roared, springing from the chair. Um, and I was looking for the outburst because it is quite the tantrum, but in the build up, it's why Jordan is so great. And it's why these books are so rereadable. It's, I hadn't really noticed that before, or at least I hadn't consciously noticed that before. That that is what makes the outburst so great, but also so revealing for the state of mind that Rand is in this moment. And why I think it's such a good illustration of what we're talking about here.
Hmm.
Because rather than adopting those, what we see later, you could call adopting those positive feminine traits, balancing the feminine with his masculine nature, you know, after his epiphany and in the lead up to the battle, where he's going around apologizing to people, you know, um, the moment where he breaks down when he sees Tam after damn near killing him the last time he saw him. Those are all positive, primarily female traits.
Well,
Here,
let's look at a
he's
reverse
adopting the
example.
negative.
Let's look at a reverse
Yeah.
example when Elaine's put in charge of the armies in the last battle. What is her conversation with Brian afterwards? And he tells her, "You did such a great job." And she says, "I didn't do anything." And he said, "Yeah, you let people do their job."
You
And
delegated is what
yeah,
he's saying.
yeah. And so she basically did the right thing in the hierarchy system where she is the leader, but she let people do their job because you can't micromanage all of these people who have so much more experience than you in these things. She let them do their job. She said, "Here's your job, do it, and I'll make the final decision if there's any controversy." And
Yeah, I just thought of that of what you said micromanage. I was about to say contrast that with how and when she secures the throne, and she is micromanaging, and it is kind of a disaster.
mhm.
I mean, she barely makes it, and a lot of people. I mean, I'll
Well,
continue to gripe about the
it's a
guardsmen getting annihilated by the
I was about to
Balefire
say it's a
tyrant
great
Grail.
example of how executive function top-down reasoning isn't always what's good for the body.
Yeah.
And she made an executive top-down decision based on where she was sitting that killed a lot of people.
Hmm. And contrast that with she succeeds very well in the position as the leader of the last battle precisely because she isn't able to micromanage. There are too many competent and confident people around her to let her, one, and two, the the circumstances don't allow her to micromanage because of how strong the opposition is
Mhm.
contrasted with the relative weakness of the opposition when she's trying to secure the throne in Camelin.
I think we could probably summarize this down and call it an hour here.
Mm-hmm,
Uh, I do want to summarize it because there's so many places in there where someone could take something the wrong way.
mm-hmm,
What we're talking about when I use the word authoritarian is that executive function top-down reasoning. And what we see from uh, Galinsky and colleagues is that the research suggests that when people get into their power positions, there's a strong correlation between the effect of that power and the gender typical stereotypes that go with them. And as we discussed, women are typically, and this isn't just a stereotype, this is actually a personality trait difference between males and females, typically more neurotic than males, and they typically take a more nurturing role. And if you put that in a position of authority, they're going to tend to those traits that end up uh, basically trying to force that from a top-down perspective, which is creating more rules, creating more systems, creating more things that govern what people can do to avoid the bad things that they say. And then they're also typically more apt to do that in the face of psychological threat. So if you're more neurotic, you're more sensitive to psychological threat, you're more likely to incorporate that in your leadership style, which takes an authoritarian bend to it instead of a delegation hierarchical merit-based system, which men
mm-hmm.
tend towards. So yes, by that I say women are more authoritarian than men. Doesn't mean it's bad. It can be bad, but there are probably places where it's good. I think it's gone wrong in the classroom. I
Mhm.
think this is the lesson plan, sit down and shut up system we have in American schools is where it's going wrong. But I actually see it actually probably a good thing and we see this in the Scandinavian countries, women are more apt to be nurses because that mentality makes you a pretty damn good nurse
Mhm.
because you have a helpless being that needs your care and probably isn't going to do the best thing for themselves. So yeah, there are good and bad places for this, but the tendency is going to be this. It's not just people bitching and moaning because a girl's in charge. It's is it the right time? Is it the right person? Or are they going to show traits like Elaine did in that last battle to where, like I said, the positive aspects of the opposite gender actually make you a better leader if you are whether you are male and female. Men can be more benevolent and nurturing, and women can be more delegating and hierarchical versus control. There you go. That's my final word.
I think that's a great final word. So we will leave it there. Who the heck knows what we'll talk about next week? Scott, where the heck are you? Ideals. Throw us a comment of where we should go with this.
Well, here's one for ideals that I was thinking of
Uh,
too for our social episodes in between. I mean, you're Jim Bro too. You've made comments in that regard. You've supplied us with some insight on that. If you got any questions, man, that
mm.
would make for a good fitness episode, throw them our way. I don't know all the answers, but I know where to find them. So it's that might make for a fun episode. So leave a
Oh,
comment that
I
we
I
can.
remember what my closing thought was going to be. I'd completely forgotten. Because I was going to mention this previously when I brought this episode up, and I forgot. And I think this is a good place to end it on because you mentioned ideals and you've mentioned faith before, and you in a number of your comments, and so you might find this interesting. Um, Go watch Jordan Peterson's "We Who Wrestle with God," Adam and Eve episode, and now he didn't say this. This is me um interpreting and rewording what he said. But when I watched it, when he gets towards the end there and he's talking about the fall and how it has been so often criticized by feminism of, oh, this is encouraging the patriarch because it's the woman who, no, hold on a second. Adam's the one who's put in charge. Where the hell is he? What's he doing? Why isn't he there? So he's either gone off and is completely ignoring his wife while she's being, you know,
Seduced.
seduced and tempted by this bad actor, or he's just standing there while the serpent says, "But did God say?" Because Adam would and should be able to say, no, this is exactly what he said because I was there. I was the one he told it to. So if he is there, he's just going, oh, boobs, right? It's so essentially, if you boil it down, you can phrase it this way: the sin of Eve was being a queen bee, was being, to your word, authoritarian, of I know better. I'm going to do this my way. I don't care that the higher, in this case, ultimate authority said that this is what should be. This is what ought to be, which is me doing what I want. What is the sin of Adam? He's a simp. He his his woman says, "Here, do this thing that you know you're not supposed to do, but I want you to do it." And he goes, "Okay." And then what happens when God confronts him? Who who does God confront? He doesn't call out Eve, even though God is God. He knows exactly what happened. So why isn't he calling out Eve? Because she's the one who did it. No. Because Adam's the one who's supposed to be in charge. Adam is the one he told, don't do this thing. Adam, where are you? Well, I'm hiding because I was naked and we were ashamed. Who told you you were naked? Well, We did the thing you said we weren't supposed to do. Why'd you do that? Well, you see, the woman you gave me. So he doubles down on the simping by trying to pass the buck, by
And
trying to blame
you wonder
God
where
and blame
Cain
the
gets it
woman.
from. Got it
And you
from
wonder
dad.
where Cain gets it from.
Got it from
Exactly.
dad.
Exactly.
It's your
So
fault.
the fall of man boils down to the woman is being a queen bee and the man is being a simp. They aren't fulfilling the roles that they are equipped for to their fullest, and it leads to disaster.
All right. Well, that ends things pretty bleakly, but
I think it's kind of funny the to look at it that way. Um, and to the stinging, it shouldn't be. It should be a hey. As I said when I first brought this up, it's you can argue, debate the degree of true that this story is, but you can't argue that there is a lot of truth in these stories. I mean, that's why we're talking about a story here, because even after we're actually done with the books, it's because there's still a lot of truth to dig out here.
well,
So,
and it helps you to visualize the concept.
mm,
So if you've already got a picture in your head from reading The Wheel of Time, now you just add a concept to that picture in your head and it becomes illustrated. It becomes a movie about the concept. So,
mhm. All right. Well, let us know what we should talk about next time. Otherwise, who knows where we'll go.
oh, we've
And
got
set,
plenty. We've got plenty. 'Cause we just
yeah.
had Monday, so
So Saturday we're going to talk some more psych because we got to talk football, and I think again, as far as an illustration, sports is a great illustration of life in a way that it doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah, it matters to the professionals who make this their living, but in the end, it's a game, and there's going to be another season. So let's use that to learn something. It's like a war game. Let's sweat in training so we don't bleed in war. Same thing in life. Let's sweat in the practice of life so we don't end up bleeding in real life.
sounds good. We'll see y'all next time.